My name's Ben Harris, and Arden Smith's here with me, and that's Joe there in the back of the room. Anyway, it's just good to be here. This is the first time in a year that we've been invited to a school to speak to a group of parents. And so I know you were hoping for, maybe not the 20 or 30 that you usually have, but...
I'm just grateful for the opportunity, and I'm grateful for the recording so that we can share it with parents.
Absolutely. Well, and that's just where we're at right now, and so we're dealing with what we got, and we'll do our best to try and create something that's going to be helpful and useful for everyone. So anyway, we were invited to come and talk about just mental health and wellness. Where are we at? What are we doing right now? Right now, we're seeing indications that we have a problem with our adolescents, our kids, and mental health like we've never had before. But I think the same still is true for adults as well. I don't think we're immune to that. I don't think that we necessarily have a significantly different experience with it, because the things that we're going to talk about tonight are no different with kids than they are with us, or vice versa. They're no different with us than they are with the kids. We experience, relationships, we experience life, we experience anxiety and stress and all of those things the same way. We all do. And so tonight we're going to just try and get into the foundation of that. Why? Where does that come from? What does that mean? And then talk about a few of the specifics. In fact, we're gonna talk about substance abuse and pornography, anxiety and depression, suicide, bullying. But we're going to talk about all those things because, substance abuse is directly related. In fact, right now, if you look across the country, we have more people in substance abuse treatment programs than we've ever had. Ever. There are more beds filled with people getting help for substance abuse issues than ever. But I think we can all look at each other and say, yeah, that's not surprising, actually. That probably makes sense. Why? Well, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about pornography. Pornography is up. The amount of use right now is through the roof. We're finding the amount of domestic violence being reported is significantly increased. We're finding the subscriptions to pornographic material. We're finding gaming, video games and things like that significantly up right now. And again, it's basically for the same reason. Anxiety and depression, we've seen a significant increase. We're seeing research studies coming in right now that are talking about 41% of college freshmen are experiencing overwhelming anxiety to the point of wanting to leave school. 41%. Right now at Dixie State University, 65% of the kids are dropping out in their freshman year to go home because they're overwhelmed. Their anxiety is through the roof. So we've got to be paying attention to this, don't we? Suicide. Yeah, we've definitely seen an increase. I just read an article, Clark County, Las Vegas, Clark County School District, reported 18 suicides between March last year and the end of December. Man, come on. That's just crazy. Absolutely crazy. Bullying. This is an interesting topic because it comes from the same place everything else comes from. That behavior. And again, we're seeing an increase in it. Why? This all ties into one thing, and it's emotional resilience. Resilience being that ability to fall on your face or to have something difficult or terrible happen, but be able to get back up and move forward. And right now, our youth don't have much resilience. They struggle. In fact, what's interesting is that they struggle with how to struggle. They don't know how to struggle. They've lived in a society that's been taking care of them for a while now. If I have a math problem that I can't figure out, What do?
Google it.
Google it. And I have an answer how fast?
30 seconds.
Yeah, in seconds. In seconds, I have my answer. I don't have to work it out. I don't have to struggle. I don't have to go research. I can have those answers just like that. And so the opportunities to struggle are fewer than they used to be, or the struggles have changed for sure. There's still definitely struggles, but we're living in a society that doesn't like struggle. And so parents are having a tendency to run out there and try and solve problems for their kids. In fact, they've changed the term with parenting from helicopter parenting. Have you heard that term before? Yeah, helicopter parenting, where they just kind of hover, so that they can swoop in when the problem happens. Well, now they're calling it snowplow parenting. Can you imagine what that might be?
Like smothering them with too much help.
Like it's getting out in front of them and plowing everything out of the way. So at least the helicopter parent, the kids had a moment of struggle before the parents would swoop in. Now they don't have any moment of struggle because the parents are out in front just plowing it all out of the way, just making sure that they don't have to struggle at all. And we'll talk about that just a little bit, but this is where this all relates. This is the common denominator that ties all of these things together. And I think if we can understand this and we can understand where it comes from, why it is, what we can do with it, then some of these issues are going to go away. One of the most important lessons I learned from a very good friend of ours is when you walk into a dark room, how do you make it light?
A switch.
You turn on the light, right? Because you've never heard anybody say, "Hey, would you please turn off the dark for me?" Why do we never hear that? Because you can't. You can't turn off the dark. The only way dark goes away is to introduce light. Dark exists in the absence of light. So anytime light is there, well, we as human beings kind of have this tendency to try and turn off the dark a lot. Where what we need to do is turn on the light. Let's get the light in there and the darkness can go away. So if we can understand this emotional resilience, if we can understand where anxiety and depression really comes from, if we can understand why bullying, why substance abuse, why pornography, why, do we have some of those challenges, because it's not hard to understand. I mean, by the time we leave here tonight, it's going to be really like, wow, that is so simple and it makes so much sense. But understanding this emotional resilience and some of the things that we can do once we understand that are that process of turning on the light. And it starts to leave no room for these darknesses. Does that make sense? Interested in that? Mm-hmm. That be okay?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've been able to condense this into a model. In fact, it's on a couple of those little tchotchkes there on the desk, which we hope you take something there before you leave. But I'm going to, at this point, turn some time over to Arden, and he's going to get us started in this process.
Awesome. It's fitting we're in a school because we're going to go back to school a little bit. Is that okay?
Yeah.
We're going to call this the adolescent. And in the middle is the great unknown, right? Who understands the adolescent brain? We think we do, but there's no, and if we think we do, they'll tell us we don't, right? That adolescent brain is tough, but our brains are just as tough. And so what we want to do is we want to talk about how the brain really works. So that as we talk about these other steps in the model, you'll be able to picture what's going on at what part of the brain and understand why things are happening the way they are. But as we do this, we relate everything to values and goals. It really makes no difference what we do or what we talk about or what we learn. If it's not in line with our values and goals, we're probably not going to retain it. It's not going to mean that much. And if we do learn it, like some of the physics I learned in school, I just let it go out because I don't use it anymore. But if it's in alignment with what I'm doing and what I am, it's going to stick. So as we talk about this, everybody has their own values and their own goals. And so as we work through this model, understanding that it applies based on those concepts. But as we talk about the brain, we're going to talk about three different areas. The hindbrain is the first one. Can you tell me what the hindbrain is responsible for?
Hindsight is 20/20.
Hindsight is 20. That's a good one. Jody, do you remember? We're not going to make you try and guess. The hindbrain is basically what keeps us alive. It controls our breathing, our heart rate, when we sleep, when we wake up, everything that keeps us alive without having to think about it. That's the very first part of the brain that develops in a youngster, even as a fetus. So that hindbrain, so that it can control everything that keeps us alive. The second part is the midbrain. And in fact, I won't put you on the spot anymore. The midbrain, that's responsible for our emotions, for our memories, based on experiences that we have. And really, it's kind of the central, if you're into computers, that core processor that's really processing everything to decide what we need to do. And again, it's basing that off of the emotions we have and the experiences we have. And we're going to come back to the midbrain because people, in fact, it's only been the last 15 years that we really have begin to understand what that midbrain is capable of. Then we get into the forebrain. You know what the forebrain's for? To problem solve, to think critically, to be able to make sense of all this stuff that's going on and help us make good decisions or make decisions sometimes that aren't so good. But we're going to go back. This little guy right here, this little almond shape, there's actually two of them, one on each side of the brain, so it doesn't matter if you're left brain or right brain dominant, you still have one on both sides. That guy acts as in fact, right there, I think that's a smoke detector, right?
Yep.
In the middle. That's his job, her job, whatever you want to call them. Their job is to sit there and smell, to look, to feel, looking for a threat. Because when there's a threat, its sole job is to make sure that we survive. What were some threats when you were little kids?
My brother.
Your brother was a bully sometimes?
Yeah.
Okay. That's a good one. Okay, so when you saw your brother and you knew he wasn't in a good mood, you probably panicked a little bit, right? Do I go hide? Do I run really fast? Do I go tell mom and dad already? Okay, what was some other threat that you had?
The darkness.
The darkness, okay. Very good. Would you be afraid if you were in the woods and you saw a bear coming at you?
Yeah.
Or there was that video of the cougar that was chasing the guy up Slate Canyon? Those are real threats, right?
Right.
And those are still threats for our youth today, but guess what their threats are in association with that as well? These things right here. And I didn't have this when I was a little kid. I didn't have it until I was 26 years old. But a threat can come from this because let's say I post something on Instagram or Snapchat that I'm pretty proud of, but I get 0 likes or 0 followers. And immediately I start running stuff in my head. We're going to talk about that. But it becomes a threat. Amygdala, it doesn't care what time of year it was. It doesn't care how old you were. It doesn't care anything other than a threat is a threat is a threat. Whether it's real or perceived, when it senses a threat, its job is simply to keep us alive. And when it fires and senses a threat, it doesn't want you to have to sit there and go through the problem solving. And so the forebrain actually goes dark. And the forebrain is responsible for what? Critical thinking, problem solving, judgment, right? We can't do that because there's a threat and I've just simply got to stay alive. Does that make sense so far? So we understand the 3 and this amygdala, right? Because this is going to be key as we're talking about this. That brain is in charge of everything. There's some cool studies about the relationship between the heart and the brain and how that starts at about 8 years old. And it's not just about keeping everything in line, but there's some real emotion and feeling that goes along with that as well. So we've got this continuum. And let's just say we have what we call a triggering event. And a triggering event can be anything. Like I said, it could be an Instagram post that didn't get enough likes. It could be a call from my best friend saying, man, you need to check your social media because people are just blasting you for something you said in class today. It could be that I just found out that my dad's in the hospital, in ICU, and he may not make it. Whatever it is, there's a triggering event that affects us. And it affects us enough. See what happened here? The forebrain goes dark. But we call this emotional hijacking. What does it mean to hijack something?
You take control of it.
How much control do you take? Or does somebody else take?
A hijacker takes all the control.
Takes all the control, right? So we've got this triggering event that causes some reactions. And the reaction is we're emotionally hijacked, which tells us we've hijacked the brain. Our emotions have hijacked the brain, whatever that emotion might be. And so in this state, we know we can't problem solve. In fact, the brain is just saying stay alive. Whether that's fight, flight, freeze, a new one, fawn or feign. You know, it's saying don't worry about problem solving right now. If a bear's chasing you, you just better run. At least run faster than Ben, because let him eat him, and I'll be okay. But we've got to do something to stay alive. One of the keys here is this intensity. You're going to see this coming throughout the model. Check your intensity, a little thermometer. This is important because on a scale from, can I write on the board? Is that okay? You see that back there? So that's a 0 to 100. And this is how we rate the amount of distress. And this is what this is for. So when we see this sign, what's the level of distress? The research out there says for a normal person, which I don't know how you guys define a normal person. There's a big range of normal for me. So they give it quite a big range. A normal person, if their level is, let's try a different color here. Somewhere between 60 and 70, 75, I can't even write, so you guys, or lower, then we can still engage that forebrain. We can still problem solve. Even though there's an emotional reaction, we can still problem solve. We can engage that forebrain. If it's higher than that, and some people, if it's 61, that's too high. Some people, if it's 76, that's too high. But if it's higher than that, the research says that's the cutoff level. That's where we lose our skills to deal. That's where we lose our skills to problem solve. And so one of the things we want to do when we see somebody that's emotionally hijacked, and this can be anywhere from somebody that's just crying in the corner or somebody having a full-blown panic attack, say, how stressful is it? What's the level of stress you're feeling? Can you give me a number from 0 to 100? Now, the cool thing about that, and we're going to talk about it here in just a second too, what am I doing by asking them a question like that?
You're making them engage their brain.
I'm forcing them to be present in the moment and give me a number, which is logical thinking, right? So even without them, even though they're out there having this panic attack or these major emotions, if I can help them at least give me a number, it helps them start to calm down, but it gives me an idea of what I'm dealing with. Because if I'm 59 or 50, I'm okay. I can problem solve with them. If I'm higher than that, there's no way I can do some problem solving. I've got to do some other things first. Does that make sense so far? Now we get into the distress tolerance tools. Have you heard of these? This is probably within the last 5-6 years, these have really become key. And you can actually Google these, as Ben said. Ask Siri, what's a distress tolerance tool? And there are hundreds. But they're tools to do just what it's saying, to bring the stress level, to reduce the level of stress so that we can engage that forebrain. And this can be anywhere from things that they call like tactical breathing or box breathing or meditation or other forms of mindfulness or you've got progressive muscle relaxation. I mean, there are a list of all kinds of different distress tolerance tools, even just exercise, listening to music, different things that will help bring that level of distress down. And our target, what are we looking for? Something that 60 range or below. Again, some of them more high functioning and have gone through some trainings, they might be up at that 75, but we need to bring that level down enough so that we can actually start to problem solve. So, I think we have time. Can we teach them one? We're going to teach you an easy one. It's called box breathing. And I'm going to have you do it with me. You don't have to take your mask off, but just so you see. What we're going to do is we're going to breathe in for 4 seconds. We're going to hold for 4 seconds. We're going to breathe out for 4 seconds. And we're going to hold for 4 seconds. And we're going to do that twice. Okay? So I want you to do it with me. First one, breathe in for 4 seconds. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Out. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. In. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Out. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. He did 2 cycles. How did everybody feel? Did it stress anybody out doing it for the first time? Cool. So it means you can do the 4 seconds. Now bump it up to 8 seconds. When you get 8 seconds down, bump it up to 12 seconds and 16. The good old Chinese monks, they can do this for minutes, not seconds. They can breathe in for 3 minutes and hold for 3 minutes and out for 3 minutes. I can't even imagine doing that. But that's a good one. Another one, and I'll tell you, my wife's a school counselor at one of the other public schools. And we did this presentation to them. It's been 3 years ago. And we walked through this. We talked about the distress tolerance tools. And like 2 days later, kid comes into her office and just sobbing hysterically. And she tries to problem solve. How well did that go? Well, we already know that the forebrain's still dark, right? Didn't go so well. And she was getting a little frustrated, and then she remembered, wait a minute. She can't problem solve now. I've got to do something. So another one we taught and that you can use is, tell me how many squares are in the room. Count them with me. Again, what am I doing?
Making them think.
Making them think, and in something that's pretty right here in front, I can count the squares, and we're going to count them rectangles too. You tell me, let's count them together. I'm engaging that forebrain. She said, yeah, can you count the squares in the room? I don't want to count the squares in the room. And then she says, well, I can see 10 or 12. And the girl started to calm a little bit, and she says, how about this? Help me out here. Can you tell me how many fruits you can name that start with the letter P? And she stops for a minute and starts thinking, and then they start naming them. And now they went to letter F. And they went to, by the third letter, the girl says, you know what, I'm done with this. I think I'm okay. I'm going to go back to class. Well, do you want to talk? No, I'm okay. And she never saw the girl come back to her office again. She stayed in class. But she did some exercises to help engage that forebrain so that we could actually talk about something. But more importantly, she could come back into the here and now and figured out, yeah, it wasn't really that big a deal. So these distress tolerance tools, these are key. And when we do group with youngsters, we actually teach one every group we run. We do outpatient counseling groups for young kids. And it's so important that we do this so that they all learn different ones. Because in the heat of the moment, when the emotional hijacking comes in, if you only have one distress tolerance tool you know, and it doesn't work, or you can't remember it, you're in some major trouble. So you get a whole toolbox together. And you get, of those toolbox, you get 10 or 15 that are really comfortable. And out of those 10 or 15, I want my top 5 that I know. And even out of those top 5, here's my top 3. Whether that's a certain music playlist, whether that's exercise, whatever it might be, maybe it's just talking to a relative or a good friend or a teacher. I'm going to have my top tools so that I can bring that level down so that I can start to engage that forebrain.
Tapping used to be a good one for my granddaughter.
What was it?
Tapping.
Okay. There's some good, have you heard of the BiTAPs? Some of the schools have used them. In fact, Iron County School in Cedar City, their whole school district have them in their classrooms. And they're just things that'll actually tap for you. Stick them in your pockets or in your socks, and they just sit there and tap one side to the other. Some of them, we call it self-compassion touch, and compassionate touch. Joe loves the one where he gives himself a hug. Actually, he hates it because he's a wrestler. And so when somebody starts to put their arms on him, his natural reaction is, I'm going to get out, and I got to get out fast. So that doesn't work for him. So he uses a different one. Ben, he loves the one where he touches his heart. Makes him feel good. I'm really not a touchy-feely guy, so I don't know which one works for me. So that wouldn't be one of my top 10. But I would have others that I go to. Any questions so far? Okay. The next one, and this is the fun one. We're going to talk about emotions and sensations. So I'm going to turn it back over to Ben because he loves to talk about his emotions.
I am actually the emotional one in my house. Yeah, and in the office. It doesn't matter where. I've been very emotional my whole life, and that's just where I live. It's how I was born, and my wife, she grew up in a home where they didn't talk about anything. They didn't show a lot of, affection or anything like that. And so when she and I first got married, it was really interesting. Every time I wanted to talk about how she was feeling and what was going on, with her, with us, our relationship, what was going on with me, she'd want to make out. Now, I know you weren't expecting that, but it was really weird and it threw me off. I'm like, not that I mind it, but it's like, what are you doing? And then, and she wasn't really aware of it either until we started talking about it. And then come to find out, guess what she was doing? She was shutting me up. That was a good way to get me to quit talking because she didn't want to talk. And especially about how we were feeling. And so she'd start making out and I'd shut up and we'd be done and she wouldn't be, freaking out about having to talk about how she felt. We really live in a society that doesn't like to talk about how we feel. We live in a society that likes to blame, likes to shift everything external. We don't like to go internal. We don't like to be in here. There's a vulnerability there that is pretty scary, and for good reason. I mean, it's not that that's an irrational fear to be vulnerable in society today. My heavens, it's like putting your head up out of a foxhole. You could get shot, and a lot of us just decide, I'll just never put my head up out of the foxhole. Well, the problem with that is that if you never put your head up out of the foxhole, you don't know when the battle's over either. Sometimes you gotta peer up there and you gotta take a look. This piece right here, this identifying emotions, is hard, but it is an enormous tool for us because the research tells us, in fact, it was only maybe 2-3 years ago, the research told us that if we could identify what we were feeling, that it could reduce our distress levels by up to 40%. Well, they've revised that, and now the research says 70%. If we can just identify the emotion, it reduces the distress associated with that emotion by up to 70%. Well, we're well on our way back to using our forebrain at that point, right? So that one really, we're not going to identify that emotion until we get some of that edge taken off. And that's what those distress tolerance tools are for. That's so we can start to think enough to be able to say, okay, what am I feeling? Now, an important part of understanding emotions is understanding how we really experience them. We experience emotions physically. That's a physical experience. So when we experience emotions that are painful, we're experiencing physical pain. And that's going to be really important. We're going to roll into that. But one of the other things that's directly associated with the emotions we feel are the sensations we have in our body. So I know if I'm about to speak in front of a group of 1,000 people, it's not uncommon for my hands to be ice cold. And that is an instant indicator to me that I'm hijacked. And I don't want to step up to the pulpit, up to that microphone and start speaking to 1,000 people and not have my forebrain engaged. And so I will immediately do some box breathing. And I always mix that box breathing with my hand on my chest. Because for me, this just for some reason feels like mom. This is mom holding me. And so if I'll do that, plus that paced breathing, that box breathing, I'll calm right down. My hands will come back to normal temperature, and I can get up and speak and not have a problem. I've got my forebrain back. I've got my executive functioning back. So enormously important to understand that relationship between the sensations in our body and the emotions that we are experiencing. Some people may feel tightness in their chest, may have a headache, may be sick to their stomach, there's just all kinds of different sensations that we could, learn to understand, learn to recognize to help us understand what we're feeling. With, again, the whole idea getting back to being able to identify the emotion, being able to give it a name. And it's interesting, too, because when we're talking about emotions, we got to make sure we're talking about feelings. My wife and I were watching a news program last night, and in the interview, somebody asked a question about how do you feel about that? And they said, well, I feel like, and then went on to explain some situation. That's not a feeling. I feel like a loser. That's not a feeling. What do you feel like when you're a loser? Then you're going to probably identify that feeling. So it's really takes some practice. We don't do it normally. We don't do it naturally. We keep all that stuff in. And sometimes parents will say, well, man, how do I have that conversation with my kids? Well, the worst time to have that conversation with your kids is when everybody's upset. So don't try and do it then. When you can see they're hijacked, don't ask them how they're feeling. It's not a good time. Help them get that distress level down a little bit, before you start walking into that. But what's really nice is if that's a language you've gotten used to using in your home, how are you feeling? And you can actually get to talk about emotions, that's huge. And you do that around the dinner table. You do that by being vulnerable yourself. If you can sit at the dinner table and say, man, I had quite a day. I just went into work today and such happened. And man, I immediately got defensive. I felt angry. I felt threatened. I felt, kind of depressed. I didn't think anybody really, valued me. And so I got pretty hijacked today. And it hurt my day. I wasn't very productive today. Imagine if you did that a few times around the dinner table. If you have that a few times, guess what happens then one day when you say, how was your day at school? Anything happen that was, significant? They may actually come back and say, yeah, it was kind of weird. This happened and I felt this way and I got kind of hijacked. Amazing if we can get to that place. I mean, it's huge because we have a common language which builds strong culture, definitely something we want in the homes, right? But it also means that I can understand what you're going through. My wife and I use this language all the time now. She'll ask me, where are you at on the model? Because she can see I'm hijacked, but to tell me I'm hijacked, yeah, not a great idea. I won't respond positively to that usually. And so she'll ask, where are you at on the model? Well, that's a really safe question to ask. And I can, quickly address that and not feel threatened, but also be able to say, yeah, I'm pretty hijacked right now. Well, at that point, she knows not to try and problem solve with me. Why? Why is it not a good time to problem solve with me if I'm hijacked?
I get angry.
Yeah, but what else is going on with me?
Your emotions.
What do we know about the brain right then?
What's going on?
You're shut down.
This is gone. The ability to problem solve is gone. How many times do we do that as parents? Go in and try and problem solve when they're hijacked? And what happens to us when we do that?
We get upset.
We get hijacked, don't we? Because we're not thinking, oh, they can't problem solve with us. What are we thinking?
What is wrong with you?
They won't problem solve with us, huh? And so we get frustrated with them. We get upset with them. And then pretty soon we're hijacked. We call that hijack squared. Hijacked squared is not good. We don't want that. I imagine that doesn't ever happen with teachers, right?
Oh, no.
Imagine if we all got to this place where we understood and we could recognize when somebody was hijacked and we didn't go chasing the problem-solving rabbit right then, right? If we understood that we needed to help them get that distress level down a little bit so that we could then talk. If we could get them to identify the emotion that they're feeling so that it could reduce that distress level by up to 70%. Imagine what could happen. But instead, guess what happens? Because we experience emotions physically, because a painful emotion is painful physically for us, what happens if I put my hand on a hot stove? What do?
Pull it back
I pull it back. How quickly?
very quickly.
Instantly, right? We're built to avoid pain. And then when I know that stove is hot the next time, guess what's not going to happen this time?
Let's not touch it.
Right. I'm not going to touch that stove. I'm going to do whatever I need to do to avoid pain. That's a problem when we're dealing with emotions that way. That's a real problem. How do we avoid pain if it's emotional pain? What are some of the ways that we do that?
Hide in the closet.
Okay. There are actually some really classic ways that we do this. We've already kind of talked about a few of them tonight. Not talked about them, but at least mentioned them. We work on an emotional continuum, okay? And we experience emotions anywhere from, this would be just kind of a normal range of emotional experience. That would be the kind of emotional experience we're always looking for, right? A euphoric kind of experience. And then this would be the other end of it, the opposite. But we work back and forth in between all of these all day long. And how much control do we have over that?
Not much.
How much control do we have over what we feel? None. Why? Where do our emotions come from? He talked about it. What part of the brain is responsible for our emotions? Do you remember?
Amygdala.
Right, that midbrain, that whole middle part of the brain is responsible for our emotions. And it stores memory in there. What are those memories?
What hurt us before?
Yes, they're all those things that have happened in our life and how we responded to them emotionally. So we've built up this emotional library in our midbrain. And that's where we take everything. It all comes right into there. It gets compared against all of that, library we have, and then it starts picking stuff out. We don't. We don't have a little card catalog that we, start filing and, grandma died, so we're looking for the appropriate emotion to. No, it just happens. And it's based on our culture. It's based on all that experience. It's based on our DNA. It's based on, our family. And it's based on all those things, not on what we're deciding to do in the moment. So we really don't have control over it. Not the fact that it happens, we don't have control over. Now, what do we have control over? Our behavior. We can control what we do when we're feeling, but we don't get to control what we're feeling. What's really important about that is that us human beings love control. We just are always looking for ways to feel like we have control, which, really we all understand that that's, silly. We don't really have control. I mean, I remember, I don't know if you remember that big plane crash over California where the two planes collided in Southern California. And man, the planes, there was nothing left of the planes. And as they were out picking up pieces of the plane, they were also picking up pieces of people. Not only could they not identify the people, they didn't even know what parts they were picking up. Control? We don't have control. We just like to think we do. Somewhere in that idea of having control is security, safety, and so we're always working toward it. Well, when we start experiencing emotions, that can get a little dicey for us, and we don't like that. And so when we're looking at these things, here's where we start dealing with emotional pain. Here's one of the challenges, or one of the problems that starts to come up. We want to be able to control that. We want to be able to avoid that, just like I'm avoiding putting my hand on that hot stove. I don't want the pain. And so a lot of the ways to do that are to numb. We call it avoiding behaviors or escaping behaviors. And so we numb. What are some of the ways you can think of that I could numb the feelings that I'm having?
Drugs and alcohol.
Okay, drugs and alcohol. Prime example. We got, and here's where Billy gets in trouble with that, okay? So let's just take Billy or Sally, doesn't matter who. They go to school one day, a bunch of kids invite them to a party. They're offered a drink. Which actually isn't even what they start with these days. What are kids starting with these days? Do you know? Marijuana. The gateway drug right now is marijuana. Everybody's trying a little marijuana. It's actually good for you, right? But here's the problem with it. So Billy and Sally get to the party, and they're offered some brownies or some gummies or some, even a joint, whatever. And when they go to the party, they're feeling, fairly normal. They might even be a little bit up into here in the happy range, because they're going to a party and they're excited. There might be a little anxiety, not sure everybody's going to be there and if they're going to feel comfortable, but they get there and their friends offer them some marijuana. They use it. What happens? They feel euphoric. This feels amazing. And it's not just the drugs. It's the fact that I got all these people around me. I got all these friends. And they were easy friends to come by, because guess what I had to do to have all these new friends? A friend of ours used to say, all you have to know how to do is flick a Bic. Know how to use a lighter, and you can have all these friends. So there they are with all these new friends. They're high, so feeling great. They leave the party, the high starts to come down. And as they're walking home, what are they thinking?
That was not good.
Dang.
I'm going to get in trouble.
Right, I might get in trouble. I promised myself I would never do that. I can't believe I just did it. All of these things start going through their head. And how are they going to start feeling? Yeah, they're going to start coming down here onto the lower end, huh? Well, this is a part of an addiction cycle. Now they're feeling here. What do they start thinking?
I want to go back there.
I know how to feel this. All I have to do is call my buddies and find out when the next party is. So they go to the party, they use again. The problem here is, though, they won't hit that first euphoric high again. It'll never happen on drugs again. So they only get to here. And then it starts to wear off. And what happens? They come down a little lower. They remember how, so they go back and they're using, and they're back and forth, but they're sliding down this emotional scale. They're ending up down here when they're not using, and maybe back up to normal when they are using. And there's not a normal time frame for that for anybody. It all depends on your DNA. It depends on your family history. It depends on, your life and what's going on in it and all those things. I mean, this could happen within weeks for one person, and it could take years for another. You just never know. It's a game of Russian roulette. But the whole process here wasn't intended. This isn't what Billy or Sally went to the party to do. But now here they are. And what they've gotten into is emotional control. That's all this is about. This is about being able to control the emotional experience. And if that's what it's all about, what else can we control our emotional experience with? What other things?
Video game.
Okay, video games. What else?
Pornography.
Pornography. What else?
Bullying.
Bullying. How does that fit in here? How do you think that fits in here?
You feel good because you're beating up another kid or whatever.
What is bullying really all about?
Sad.
They're
Being hurt.
scared.
Yeah.
That's really what bullying's all about, is being scared. Well, what did we learn about the amygdala in the midbrain? What's its job?
to defend.
It's a smoke detector looking for what? Threats. So if a bully's scared, what does his midbrain think's going on?
He's being threatened.
He's being threatened. So he's got to either, when we're threatened, we either fight, flight, run, or we freeze. Or feign fun, which is try and placate or give people what we think they want so that they'll go away and leave us alone. Right? So a bully is just in the fight mode. He's hijacked. He feels threat. So pornography, gaming, drugs, they all work on exactly the same area of the brain. They work right in that midbrain. Now, the midbrain produces a chemical called dopamine. It's the pleasure chemical. It's what makes us feel good. And drugs, let's say cocaine, you use cocaine, it'll raise dopamine levels 700% of normal. So when it raises those dopamine levels that high, the little factory that's producing the dopamine says, time out. We got to shut down production. That's way too much. We got to quit. But then it all goes away very quickly because the stimulant to produce it isn't there anymore. With drugs, it's like 10 or 15 minutes and the stimulant's gone. And so if the little factory has shut down and the stimulant's gone, there's nothing to get the production of dopamine in there. And so it crashes. Well, if the pleasure chemical disappears, what does the brain think is going on?
You're in trouble.
You're dying. It thinks you're dying. So what's it going to do?
Defend.
Yes, which means it's going to shut off the forebrain, the logical part of your brain. It's going to shut it off, go right to that hindbrain, go into survival mode, and fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. That's what it's going to do. That's what we're built to do. We can't stand on the path looking at the bear wondering if its fur is soft. We have to fight or flight. We have to, or we won't survive. So if it thinks I'm dying because the pleasure chemical is crashed, we've just got to make sure somehow that I'm going to live. So it's got to go back and find a stimulant. It's got to go back and find that drug. That's what's going on. Really simple. It's not a complicated process. So when that's going on, and cocaine can raise those dopamine levels, 700% of normal, there are other things that are worse, believe it or not. Now, there's brain damage, literal brain damage going on with chemical use, but gaming, and in particular, role play kind of gaming, first-person shooter, where you're stepping into a role, World of Warcraft, Grand Theft Auto, some of those where you're the character in the game, those can raise dopamine levels as much as 1,100% of normal. 1,100% of normal. And unlike drugs, that after you take it, it dissipates from the body, the stimulant's gone in 10 or 15 minutes. How long is the stimulant going on with somebody playing games? Hours, possibly days, right? So imagine what's happening in that midbrain. Now, these pictures here, what we're seeing, and if you can't read that, I'll read it for you. The red represents normal dopamine levels, okay? The yellow is medium, levels starting to drop, and then green is very low levels of dopamine. And you can see here, this is a normal brain. That's what it's supposed to look like. This is the brain of a cocaine user. So not only do you see that we don't have any red in there, that the dopamine levels are basically disappearing, but what else do we notice about that brain?
So it's splitting or something.
Yeah, there's holes in it, huh? Well, those are dead areas of the brain. And that's what chemicals do. They literally kill the brain. Now, the brain can regenerate, takes a lot of time. It'll also find new neural pathways, so it can still do what it needs to do. If somebody gets into recovery and stops using and stops damaging the brain, they can recover. But this is what's going on. This is the brain of an alcoholic. Again, you kind of see the same thing, don't you? Really low levels of dopamine. But what's interesting here is, can you read what that one says? That's the brain of an obese person. There's no, what's the difference? The only difference is we haven't actually done brain damage yet, right? That's the only difference. That midbrain is being impacted the same way these drug users are being impacted. In fact, this one worse than this one. This one has more dopamine level in it because there's some red. Here, there's no red there. Imagine if we understand this. Imagine if we understand that pornography raises dopamine levels 1,700% of normal. It's the highest one we know. It's going to look like this. Person viewing pornography, their brain's going to start to look like this. The dopamine's just going to disappear. That factory is going to shut off because those levels are so high, way too high. It's just going to shut off and be done. That's it. We're not going to produce any more dopamine. We don't need it. You don't need it. Right? Bullying. It's the same thing. When they get into that fight, flight, or freeze mode, when they get into that, I've got threats and so I've got to fight, having that kind of feeling of control is very enticing, very addictive. Video games, very addictive. Pornography, very addictive. We can do these same things with spending. Spending's a big one. Sexual acting out, big one. Gambling, big one. These are all things that impact the brain the same way. So when we're working with our kids and we're paying attention to what our kids are doing, are they participating in numbing activities? For me, when I go to the grocery store and I come out with $35 worth of sweet and salty in my bag, headed for the couch and the remote, guess what I'm doing? I'm numbing. I've got some emotions going on that I don't want to feel. I also don't want to talk about them. I don't want to process. That's why the couch and the remote. Just leave me alone. And I'm going to eat my way to oblivion. Right? Works the same way. It's all the same behavior. The outcomes, unfortunately, with drugs and alcohol can bring on death a lot earlier. However, when we don't deal with that emotional stuff that's going on, when we don't learn how to reduce that distress level, it turns into anxiety. It turns into depression. Those things left untreated turns into what? Or can turn into suicide. So left untreated, any of these things can ultimately result in loss of life. So we've got to understand what's going on. We've got to be willing to talk about it. We've got to be willing to sit around the table. Because here's what's going on. How does not getting enough likes on an Instagram post turn into being emotionally hijacked? Because that doesn't seem like a big deal, right? Who cares? How is it that if I go to a meeting with my partners and I sit down and I've had this great idea I've been working on for a while, and I throw that idea out in the meeting and I hear crickets back? How could that possibly turn into me being emotionally hijacked? How is that a triggering event?
Story in your head.
Where does the story in my head start? Right there, huh? Because as soon as that happens, when nobody says anything about the idea I just put out in the meeting, what's going on in my head?
They don't like me.
They don't think I'm smart. They don't appreciate. They don't respect me. They don't want me around. We had a poor kid come into group one time. He'd been hijacked all day long. And he comes into group and he starts talking about it a little bit. Well, come to find out, and he's kind of a sleepy looking skater dude, right? And he's in high school, senior. And he walked in, this is the first day of his AP English class. So he walks in and the teacher smirks at him. He's hijacked for the rest of the day. Why? How is that a triggering event? How does that become hijacked? What happened when the teacher smirked at him?
He made a story in his head that the teacher thought he didn't look normal.
He started a story in his head, didn't he? And that's what he said, that she looked at me and I could tell. She didn't think I belonged in this class, that I wasn't smart enough to be in this class. I wasn't a part of the popular crowd that was in this class. Yeah, that's what went on in his head all day long. How many of us do that? No.
So I'll finish that story a little bit too before we talk about that. Because stories in our head, like you said, can run rampant. And this story that started in his head as soon as he walked into class, even before he saw the teacher, he's like, oh, there's all the cool kids. There's all the smart kids. The story's going already. So part of the story's in our head because we want to get everything out, right? What is the story? And we want all the details. If it becomes a novel, then it becomes a novel. We're going to publish it. But we want all of the details. And of those details, then we're going to go through and we're going to cross out everything that's not fact. Okay? Everything that's not fact. And then what we're left with is the problem. So, Ben asked you a question. What is the story in your head, even tonight? And you don't have to answer. I want you to really think about this. What is the story in your head as a grandma, as, an aunt, even as a parent, about kids that maybe you have that are struggling in your family? Is it a good story? Or do you start to get a little sweaty palms, maybe a heart racing? How many of us say, what did I do wrong? I've been there. I have a son that struggles very, very much with mental health. Almost took his own life. And I've been in this industry for 26 years. I saw all the signs. I knew what was going on. And I couldn't do anything to help. You want to know what the story in my head was? It wasn't good. Luckily, he got to a point where he says, Dad, I need help. Awesome, bud. But the story in my head wasn't good. Did I cause this because I divorced his mom? What's my role in this? Would it have been better if I'd have just stayed with her and suffered myself? Was I being selfish here? Did I do something? Man, the stories were bad. And these stories, really, I want you to think about. When you start feeling something, what story's going on in your head? Ben was just doing a session today. And, well, no, it wasn't a session. He was having a conversation with somebody he did a session with earlier in the week and talking about this. Because his wife came to him with a problem, needed to talk to him, and immediately he got defensive. So Ben says, what if she'd have used some of this language? Johnny, I've got this story in my head I need to check with you. If that's how I approach somebody with an issue I have or a question I have, is there room for defensiveness right there? Because what am I talking about? My story in my head, and I need to check it to see if I'm accurate. And if I am, then we'll deal with it. If not, then we got the facts. Back to this young man in school. Do you know what the problem was after he went through everything and crossed it out? Because now we're able to identify his problem. The problem was, as he went through it, all that was left, and he had 2.5 pages worth of a story. And again, like Ben said, it started in the morning, and it took us about a half hour to get him calmed down and grouped to even be able to get to this point. The facts that were left on his sheet. I went to class, AP English. I looked around and saw kids that I don't fit in, and the teacher smirked at me. I got hijacked. That was it. Those were the 4 facts. Well, lo and behold, he checked the story in his head. He went back to the teacher because he identified the problem, and part of his solution was, and I need to find out why she smirked. She'd been following this kid for years because he'd been turning these essays in. And they were awesome, amazing. She wanted to turn them into competitions, to contests. And finally, she gets him in his class. And that smirk was, we're going to have some fun. not at all what he was thinking. But he was able to deal with it. So we're working through these stories, so that we can finally problem solve. Now, as Ben said, what we like to do when one of our loved ones is struggling is we want to do what? Dads are worse at this, but what do dads do when their kid's struggling? What do we want to do? We want to fix it, and we want to fix it right now. And moms, they struggle too. And I'm a grandparent. Man, when one of my little grandbabies is struggling, I want to fix everything. And I'll put everything aside. But moms, they do the same thing, because it's hard to watch your loved one hurt and struggle. But we can't problem solve with them because, again, if they're hijacked, they can't problem solve. Now, identifying and solving the problem, once you have it identified, everybody knows how to solve the problem. And you can Google, there's 50 million ways to do it. You identify the problem, you talk about it, you throw out the ideas, you come up with one, and then you try it, right? If it works, awesome, we move on. If not, we go back to the table and throw all the ideas out again. That's problem solving. The next one is go with the flow. This is where we have to be able to let our loved ones struggle a little bit. Because if they're sad about a situation that got them emotionally hijacked, let's make it real. One of the friends they knew in school committed suicide. And it's got them hijacked, maybe even contemplating suicide, right? We've got to be able to work that brain back into operation. And once we have gotten the distress level down and we're problem solving, maybe even we've got the problem solved. Is there still going to be some sadness? This kid just lost one of his best friends? Absolutely. We don't need to rescue them. We don't need to take that pain or that hurt away. We just need to help them and be supportive. The last part of this is building connections, and this is huge. Ben said, if I want to be in with the guys that smoke marijuana, all I got to do is flick a bit, right? If I want to be in whatever club, I just need to do what they do or act like they do. But what we're talking about here is building healthy connections. One of the hardest things for parents to hear from their kid that might be struggling is, Mom or Dad, you're a big trigger for me. Because somewhere along the way, maybe we weren't our best self. Maybe we did try and problem solve, or maybe we did get hijacked and say or do things we shouldn't have. But just because we're mom and dad, we're going to be a trigger. Building healthy connections. Maybe it's somebody, a good friend. Maybe it's an awesome teacher. Maybe it's a responsible adult. One of my biggest supporters was one of my coaches. I could go to him. He cared about the individual. But they have to be building connections. This past almost year now, what have we not been allowed to do because of this pandemic? Connect. And if we do, we're like this, right? Or we can't come to school because somebody's had a breakout. Or we're just going to cancel. They don't have these. We don't connect. And we isolate. And this last year we have seen a drastic increase in the amount of mental health issues caused by not connecting. We use these to connect. How effective is that?
Not very.
I'll send a text to him, and to Ben, and he'll say, why were you yelling at me? Man, I just asked you a question. Well, that's not how it sounded on the phone. How does it sound on the phone? Through a text. Not his fault. But there's no way for me to communicate how I'm feeling. And if I really say how I'm feeling on a phone, that opens me up to a lot of rejection, a lot of judgment. So I'm not going to do that. And all you're going to see of me on this thing is my very best self, or what I want my best self. How do I compare to that? If all I'm reading on social media is about all this wonderful stuff that's going on in everybody else, and I'm having a crappy week, crappy month, where's my self-esteem going to go? Where's my emotions going to go? We've got to build connections face to face if we can. So, like he was saying, dinner table. Have dinner around the table. Don't have it and everybody go to their respective rooms. Well, and I'm going to tell on my daughter and my stepson, because they get up there and they're on their phones all the time, you know, and then you get the little one, mom, 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 will you please answer her? Oh, did she say something? You can't even hear it anymore. Be present. Right now they're saying isolation, and you want to talk about physical. Isolation is physically acting on the body, not just emotions, but physically. They're saying that the effects of isolation, not having anything to do, sitting down in the basement, has the same effect physically as smoking 13 cigarettes a day. Same medical effect. We've got to have connections. And in order to have connections with our young ones, we have to speak their language too. That's what was cool. I got to give props to St. George Academy. They've actually had us out. I've been here 4 different times. This is my 5th time. And they had all of us out teaching their whole 8th grade, because we came out and did a presentation for the faculty, and then we did a presentation for the psychology class, teaching them this model. And the faculty, the administration said, you know what? We need to have this language so a teacher can say, why are you acting like a jerk? Or knock that off. They can have some of this. Hey, come back and talk to me a minute. Feels like you're getting a little emotionally hijacked. What can I do? Can we do some breathing? They've got this language that not only the parent or the staff know, but the kids know too. Learn a language, a healthy language. And as Ben said, we don't learn that language when we're in the heat of the moment. When there's nothing going on and you're sitting at home, guys, I want to talk to you about something we learned today. And take one of the things. So you've got the model there and you can talk about each one of those. And man, how cool would it be if we were able to process this and go through without getting emotionally hijacked? We've covered a lot of stuff tonight, stuff we teach our kids over the course of 8 to 12 weeks. You got it in about an hour and 15 minutes. So we know it's a lot. We'll leave stuff with Jody. If you have questions for us, please don't hesitate. But are there any questions right now from anybody here?
I'm just going to join you
Okay.
to answer questions. I will add, though, on this building connections, it's interesting. It used to be when a baby was born, they'd take that baby, slap its butt, get it crying, right? Take it over to the table, weigh it, clean it off, wrap it up in a big blanket, come over and show it to mom, and then what? Take it to the nursery. Do they still do it that way? Not at all, do they? What do they do now?
They put it right on the mom.
Skin to skin, right on mom's chest. Immediately. Why? Why do they do that now?
The bond.
There's a bond, but it also elicits a chemical in the body called oxytocin. And oxytocin helps all of our body regenerate. It helps cells regenerate. It helps the lungs develop. It helps the eyes develop. It helps all those things start to happen. That skin-to-skin contact. How much of that do we have with our friends and our loved ones, especially in this last year? Been significantly reduced, huh? We have kids complaining of feeling lonely because the only contact they're having is on a phone. There's no physical contact. Colin Karchner, bless his heart, we lost him this year, but he was a big advocate for quit giving your kids smartphones. They don't need them. They're not built to handle millions of judges of their life by, participating in social media and all that kind of stuff. And because you can get a hold of them with a regular flip phone, they don't need a smartphone. So quit giving them smartphones and give them, what is it, Joe? 8 hugs a day for 8 seconds each. 8 hugs a day for 8 seconds each.
Try that once. It's hard. Especially for somebody that doesn't like a lot of touching. An 8-second hug can seem like forever sometimes, and it's awkward at first.
Yeah, Joe and Joni and I have to actually sneak up on him, tackle him in his office, hold him down so he can have an 8-second hug. That's the only way we can do that with him. These connections are really, really, really important. We have to have them to live.
There's actual research out there. We're wired for connection. And when we don't have it, you see it in old people. When their spouse passes and their kids are no longer, they just wilt away and die. Their body shuts down as well as their mind.
Yeah, my granddaughter, her whole world came to an end last March when everything shut down. She went from soccer, school, friends to she was home by herself, had nobody. She just went whoosh.
You can see it happen, can't you? It's so significant. You can literally watch it happen.
How serious if somebody says, if your child says, I want to kill myself or I want to die or whatever their comment is about that, how serious do you take them?
What do you think?
I would say delete them. Because sometimes you just say that just because you're creating the story in your head, but
Sure. And they might be just looking for some attention, right?
right.
And that's what kind of runs in our head. We start to wonder, is it just a phase, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it worth ignoring it and finding out?
No.
It's not, is it? There are some things in life that, it's worth, just don't give it a lot of energy, don't give it a lot of attention, and it'll pass. And if it doesn't, okay, then we'll deal with it. But the consequence of this one, it's permanent.
And understanding that such a high percentage of those that actually complete suicide never intended to. They didn't want to die.
Yeah.
They were hurting.
They want the pain to go away.
They were trying to numb, and so maybe if I could just get some attention, but it goes too far because nobody paid attention.
Right.
Nobody took them serious, and it's really accidental, but it's a suicide. So yeah, I would take everything, and again, enlist those around you. Don't be afraid, even though they might say, don't tell anybody. No, involve people. Help the school understand, here's what's going on, and I need your help. Just to be some eyes and ears. You don't need to intervene, but if they've got a counselor, tell them. Maybe even if they've got a really good friend that's a good role model for them, tell them, get other people involved because they're not always going to be with you all the time.
I appreciate it.
Okay.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thank you for being brave enough to come. I hope I'm going to get on a little soapbox for a minute because I know Jody and some of these other people in the schools, they're doing everything they can for these kids. They're doing everything they can for the parents. And the parents, they cry out for help. And what can you do? And why can't you? It's stuff like this that we as parents, we have to get involved. And we have to go tell our neighbor, I know you're dealing with stuff, come and go with me. We started this with Washington County School District, and they had 10 people their first time. The whole district.
He lectured them too.
I did. But by the end of those, because they did them once a month, we were having 100 to 120 people come. And it wasn't because of anybody in the school day, it was because the parents said, enough's enough. Let's take care of our own community. Our kids come to school, and they're only here 5 hours a day. Where are they the other 19? It's our responsibility. So tell your neighbors. And so when Jody puts another one of these on, whoever's speaking, even just her, she's got a wealth of knowledge. She'll put one of these on. Get people to come. Put them in your back pocket. Say, let's go have an evening. Okay? All right.